I'm Vicki Hogarth and welcome to Southwest Magazine. I'm joined today by Ross Weaver and Bernie Potvin, old guys in action who have been bicycling across Canada on bamboo bikes to raise money for wheelchairs made out of bamboo for children in Uganda. Thank you both for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Pleasure.
So, I know this isn't your first time doing a fundraiser, but I want to start off first by talking about this specific expedition. When exactly did you start and where did you leave from?
So we're doing this in 3 phases, and we started in October last year, going from White Rock to Calgary. Then in April this year, we went from Calgary to Thunder Bay, Ontario. And 11 days ago, we started in Thunder Bay, Ontario, and we're here today. And our last stop will be St. John, New Brunswick. So we're really close to the end.
Well, I just can't believe you've done that in 11 days. I'm not sure if I could get to St. John in 11 days on a bike. What is a bamboo bike like compared to other bicycles? I just saw one for the first time outside. It looks quite fancy, actually.
Well, it's made of bamboo, but it's also constructed with bark and with glue, etc. So it's actually surprisingly heavy, but bark is stronger in terms of tensile strength than even steel. So it's heavy, but it's secure, strong, and we were commenting, in fact, the other day, just how well these bikes have actually worked for us.
Wow.
Yeah. And we haven't had a flat tire, not that the tires are made of bamboo, but we haven't had a flat tire since Thunder Bay, and no breakdowns whatever, and we get a lot of people looking at us, and we can only assume it's the bikes and not Bernie.
Could be a little bit of both, you never know. Can you tell me what gave you the idea to do this particular fundraiser? Why the money for this cause?
We're doing this through an organization called Embrace International Foundation, which is run by my sister and brother-in-law, and they've been in the development and relief business for probably about 40 years, and in different organizations we've supported them. But what was it, in 2018, we did a fundraiser for them called the Uganda High-Low Expedition. So we climbed to the highest point in Uganda, the 3rd highest mountain in Africa. We cycled down the Rift Valley to the lowest point in Uganda, and then did a triathlon at a crater lake. And this was all for the benefit of an organization called the Chininga Child Development Center, which works with kids with disabilities. And that's what Embrace International Foundation does. With different countries, they find partners like Chininga who are working with kids with disabilities, because in the world of kind of people who are disadvantaged, there's kind of men in poorer countries, there's women in poorer countries, there's children in poorer countries, and then there's kids with disabilities. And they really are at the bottom end of the scale in terms of people have needs. And
then there's girls, child, below the children.
Yeah, good point.
At the lowest of the low. So these mobility devices are going to make life so much easier, and it's so plentiful and so cheap to build, and we have contacts there who are already beginning to build them. So the money we raise will build, $100 will build a wheelchair.
Really? And they build these right in Uganda?
Yep.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, some of the same construction techniques we have for a bicycle. So that's the technique, bamboo bicycles for bamboo wheelchairs and walkers. And just to give an idea of the kind of scale where things are at, is 2.5 million children with disabilities in Uganda, and only 9% of them are enrolled in school, compared to 92% of kids that don't have disabilities. So there's just a lot of room to help them out and move them up to the point where they can get there. And one of the first things they need is the ability to get to school and get around school, which is where the mobility devices come in.
Wow. So how do people, if they're interested in what you're doing and what you're fundraising for, how do they give to what you're doing?
Well, thank you for asking. Yeah, so it's the Old Guys in Action, but we're doing this under the auspices of Embrace International Foundation. So embrace.ca is the website. And where it says donate on their website, there's a list of things that you can donate for. One of them is Old Guys in Action Cross Canada Bamboo Bicycle Expedition.
Okay.
And so embrace.ca, Old Guys in Action under the donate button.
Old Guys in Action, and this isn't, as you mentioned, it's not your first expedition. When did you start? doing these kind of expeditions in the name of charity?
Well, I mean, 20 years ago we sat down over probably a second glass of beer and we said, we can't just sit there when there's so much injustice in the world. So what could we do? What could we leverage? We run, we cycle, and we do crazy things. None of it really very good, but we do these things. And we said, well, let's do something to raise learning, engagement, networking, and support for best-in-class causes. So we started off with, we do the Calgary Icebreaker Polar Dip every year, 14 years of having done that. We've done marathons in Kenya, Toronto, Calgary, raised money for different organizations. We've cycled, as Ross said, through Sierra Leone and Guatemala, doing these long bicycle for maternal and child health care. So we've just kept on thinking, you know, Ross is getting old, so we got to keep on doing a lot of these things as quickly as we can. I mean, just look at him. He's frail and he's old, but he keeps going somehow. I don't know how he does it.
Yeah, so who's the older between the two of us? There we go.
Do I dare ask?
Yeah, no.
No, okay.
We'll leave it there.
Can people follow Old Guys in Action in general? Obviously, this isn't
Yes.
you might have more expeditions on the horizon as well.
Yes, if our wives will let us do that. Yes, so oldguysinaction.com is our website, and Old Guys in Action is the moniker for Facebook and Instagram. So we're on all of those.
Can I ask if you've seen any of your efforts in action? Have you seen some of the things that you've fundraised for go to good use?
You might have some ideas, Bernie, but I know for me, the coolest thing is when we were in Sierra Leone, we were raising money for birthing huts. So these are places where the women could give birth, and Sierra Leone at the time had one of the highest rates of maternal mortality in the world. And it's because they live so far from the hospital, and there's kind of traditional techniques that don't always work so well. So we were able to raise $40,000 money for different birthing huts, and I think we ended up funding...
I think 11 in total by the time it was finished.
Yeah. And then I've been back to Sierra Leone, and you could actually see these birthing huts with the mothers there, and you know, in safe, clean conditions. And that was the result of you know, doing the Sierra Leone cross Sierra Leone expedition. So that was very heartwarming.
Do you travel a lot, and have there been instances when you're on a trip that you come across something that calls you to make it an effort that you fundraise for?
Well, I mean, recently it's more to do with the people you meet who are engaged in just remarkable activities. I mean, we've met a person who provides recovery programs for girls and women taken out of sex trafficking. We met this person about 10 years ago, fell in love with what she's thinking and how she does things and who she was. She's recently passed away, but 42 homes in 6 different countries. So we do the Calgary Icebreaker Polar Dip and raise money. We've raised nearly $1 million to support these homes that provide education and recovery for girls and women. It's mostly to do with the people we meet. And
So another example of that is that we support Charles Mully Children's Family in Kenya. This is a guy who was an orphan himself, became very wealthy, and then had an experience where he said, I'm not going to make money anymore, we're just going to work with orphans. And he's adopted literally 12,000 children.
Wow.
Because if you run an orphanage in Kenya, you actually adopt them. So he has the largest family in the world. And an amazing operation, so we've supported him over the years as well.
We've been there a number of times, run marathons with the Kenyan kids. We went there to teach the Kenyans how to run.
A bad idea.
Oh, it's a bad idea. Kenyans, right?
You'd see all these world-class runners going in a marathon that we organized, and the only time you ever see them at the start line, then it's just we're in their dust, and then the dust settles, and then we came along, and people were actually pointing and laughing at us. I think
Yeah, they were, yeah.
Me, but yeah, so I had never challenged a Kenyan to a run.
Fair enough. You talk about the people you meet as inspiring, some of the charities you give for. Is it also the people that you meet that give to what you're doing? For instance, let's take what you're doing right now, cycling across this leg of Canada. Are you meeting people along the way that ask questions, that want to know more about you and why you're doing what you're doing and why you're on a bamboo bike?
Well, we've met some of the most amazing people, and it's interesting. We talked to them. We asked them 3 questions: what do you love about Canada? What do you love about the way you're living? Where you're living?
Where you living?
And do you know anybody who's under a difficulty, a physical disability, and needs a mobility device? So we ask them those questions, and the answers are amazing. They, in the conversations, I don't know, maybe 3-4 times, somebody would stop, run into the house, come out and give us $100 or give us $20. So people are quite moved by this. I really love these bamboo bikes. I wish we could bring one in and show you everybody what these things look like.
But the answers to those 3 questions are really interesting too. So what do you love about Canada? So people say, well, we love the wilderness, we love the freedom is high on the list.
Yeah.
The opportunity that's here. So a lot of people who have moved here from other countries say, it would take 5 generations to do what we can achieve for our family in 2 generations. Just across the spectrum, all things, and you realize just how much you love the diversity of the scenery and also the cultures going from one end to the other. And so we got so many really wonderful answers on that.
Yeah.
And then the second question, what do you love about where you live? And who wouldn't love to live in St. Andrews by the Sea, New Brunswick?
Right.
For example, this is our favorite place. Did you know that? All across Canada, this here.
Yeah, this place
is your favorite. Well, and you also happen to be staying tonight at your brother's place, John Weaver, at Salty Towers, where I imagine you will meet a number of characters to tell your story to tonight. So that's an interesting connection you have to this part of the world.
Very much, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Is it important to you when you take something on like this, just reading about what you're doing, that you are working with Uganda to find a manufacturer in Uganda, whereas sometimes I find a charity might, they might get wheelchairs and ship them there, but you found a way to do it where you're also working with the country and manufacturers there to do something good for children.
This is a bit of a longer story, and hopefully I can condense it a little bit, but the fellow that Embrace International Foundation supports as an organization in Uganda is a British guy who, when he was graduated from university, he hitchhiked, backpacked across Uganda, and he met an old timer. He said, if I was coming to Uganda, I would buy up this land around this here Crater Lake, and I'd build a safari lodge. And he said, well, that sounds like a good idea. Sort of like buying Salty Towers. Let's do it. That'll be an adventure. And so this guy who had never built a house in his life had a vision. I'm going to build a massive log out of eucalyptus trees, log cabin, and it's massive, and then 8 total outbuildings, and he's turned this into one of the premier destinations in Africa. It's called the Chininga Lodge. He married a Ugandan lady, and their first kid had a disability. He had cerebral palsy. And so he started bringing people over to give advantage to this child they had. And then he realized actually a lot of kids with disabilities, particularly cerebral palsy, around this area, and he started the Chininga Child Development Society. So he has been working, thousands of kids have gone through there and improved their life as a function of KCDC. And then he realized that wheelchairs and mobility devices are the things that are lacking, and he started researching, went all around North America looking for different ways to use local approaches with bamboo to bring back to Uganda. And so he is now manufacturing those devices that we'll be using. So it's all kind of connected through this KCDC Chininga Child Development Center.
Wow. Can we talk a little bit about your past? What has been one of the most adventurous adventures that you've been on in the name of charity, outside of this one that you're on right now?
Well, I mean, for each of us, it may be different. For me, it was Guatemala. We started off at almost 12,000 feet, and the next 200-300 feet were uphill. And we cycled. By the time we finished going from just underneath the border of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean, the height of Mount Everest, up and down, up and down, up and down. That's just a spectacular country and a spectacular. We just enjoyed that immensely. I don't know, Ross, what would be yours?
Well, I think the Uganda high-low expedition, and particularly the high part. You know, you think of Uganda, literally there was a chimpanzee reserve next to the Chininga Lodge that we were staying at. Just amazing seeing them. But climbing Mount Stanley, the third highest mountain in Africa, 16,800 feet, you start and you're walking for a week through jungle, getting higher and higher until you're into terrain that's a bit like, you know, maybe Western Canada. And then by the time you're at the top, you're on full-on ropes and glacier travels with crampons and ice hooks, ice axes, and you know, short on oxygen. Really challenging conditions. So I mean, that was pretty exotic, I guess, for us. But really, it's not about us having fun, although it sounds like maybe we did have fun along the way.
Yeah.
It's really about the causes that we support, and that's the only reason we're doing all this.
Yeah, fun is a byproduct. You can't just sit there. So you get out and you try to make a difference. And if you have fun, great. If not, if it's tough, grueling, riding a bike across Canada, then running a marathon in Kenya with Kenyan kids, highlight. During the marathon, Ross and I looked at each other and said, "We're in Kenya running a marathon with Kenyans." It doesn't get better. It's just, it was just an amazing experience.
I got to tell you a little story on that part of it. But during one of the runs, we were running with probably 300 or 400 kids. And some of these kids are running in their bare feet. Some of them are carrying brand new Adidas because they didn't want to get them dirty. And they're running, it was an ultra marathon, that particular one. And along the way, someone accidentally tripped Bernie. Bernie fell flat on his face, busted his lip, and was unconscious in the middle of nowhere, Kenya. So and I was ahead, one of the few times I was ahead of Bernie in any running event. So I didn't see any of this. But they put Bernie between two people on a motorcycle, unconscious, held him up, took him to the nearest clinic, which happened to be a veterinary clinic. And then what happened, Bernie?
Well, and then they put me on a gurney, and I become in and out of consciousness. And I remember the most vivid memory is somebody with a white coat with a needle. You can't see this. I mean, I used to be gorgeous until this happened. And a needle going into, and so I had 8 stitches on the outside and 4 on the inside, and they froze us.
Wow.
And almost got it right. You know, for a horse it would be fine.
About.
For a person, maybe not so much, but the mustache helps.
How come she's smiling every time?
I can't believe it's taken me this long in the interview to ask this, but how long have you been friends for, and where did you meet?
Oh, we're not friends.
No. What's your backstory then?
I think for about over 20 years. We knew each other in Calgary. We met at a church, and just knew that we both liked cycling and running, and it just kind of connected, and so we've been at it ever since.
And okay, continue. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think one of the things we realized early on is that early on in our lives, around the same age, around 21, we were both in Africa at the same time. I lived a year in Ethiopia. Bernie was in Zambia. And we started comparing notes. And I think that experience early in our life, coming from a very privileged background in Canada and living in that condition, that changed our life. You know, we realized we can enjoy all the benefits of Canada, but we can't ever forget people that are living in less advantaged conditions, and we want to make a difference if we can. So I think that was also a connection.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Now, even though you're sort of coming to the end of a big expedition right now, in your head, are you already planning what the next one will be? I'm going to take that silence as a yes.
Well, we've got to clear it with our wives, and that's a big one. But no, we've talked about what might be next, but no, nothing is emerging yet.
Well, a few years ago I was in India, and kind of got this idea that it'd be really cool to either run across India or go across on a motorized rickshaw. So when I was over there, I learned how to use a motorized rickshaw. And I got an organization that we're supporting over there that said, you know, that would actually be a good fundraiser for them. And so that's kind of on my list. I don't know if Bernie, he still works, so he may not be able to get that time off, and I may not get approval from the powers that be. But yeah, going across India on a rickshaw, motorized rickshaw, might be one.
Wow. Yes, it's Dr. Bernie Potvin, which I didn't say. So yes, still a working doctor. So you do have to commit to a job, I guess, most of the time.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about Old Guys in Action, the name is obviously funny. But is there a sense in what you're doing that, I mean, we know so much about, and I should ask a doctor this, physical activity keeping you young, but is that part of the a nice side effect too, is that it really does keep you young at heart, and physically young too, by doing what you're doing?
Well, I guess so. I think so. I mean, we're both into that 70 bracket, and we're both going strong. We both run, cycle, swim. We both. So I something maybe I don't know if it's DNA or I don't know if it's, but I think being active is a gift. It's a gift to be able to do what we're doing, and it makes it even doubly for us motivating to know that kids can't be mobile like we are, but maybe with a wheelchair, maybe with a walker, maybe with a bicycle, kids can enjoy something that we enjoy. So.
And you as well, Ross, how do you feel about it?
Just as you were talking, it's interesting. I was thinking about the connection with people that are living with disabilities, and where that really struck me on this trip was coming across a part of Saskatchewan, coming into Portage-la Prairie. That's Manitoba, Portage-la Prairie, Manitoba. And it was an uphill, and there was a gale force wind, might have been 35, 40 miles an hour. And semi-trucks were coming by, and it almost brought you to tears because you were working as hard as you could and you could barely move. And yet trucks and cars are going by, probably oblivious to the fact that's going on. I think there must be some of that if you're living with a disability, particularly if you're in conditions where there aren't ramps, you haven't got the right devices to be able to get around, and people just don't even notice you. That kind of sense of what kind of captured me there really gave a sense of how difficult it must be to be in a world of people who are able-bodied and not be able to do the things that they're doing. And it's interesting, we started this part of the trip in Thunder Bay, Ontario, at the site where Terry Fox stopped his run across Canada. And it occurred to me that he focused on what he could do as opposed to what he couldn't do. So he was living with a disability, but he could still run in the form that he ran, and he inspired generations of Canadians, raised tens of millions of dollars in the process of doing that. And I think as we've talked to people about, do you know someone who lives with a disability, often that's the story we get. People have had funerals for their former self because they can no longer be that person given their disability, and yet they have ability to be someone new, and so they've made that really strong connection. So we've been really inspired by people who we've talked to who are living with disabilities through all this, not only to be very thankful for being able-bodied, but also to realize that disability is something that, with support from other people, can lead to a new life, and in some cases, surprisingly, can be a better life than what you lived before.
I love that you mentioned Terry Fox. I was actually weirdly born in Victoria. My family's all from here, but I grew up partly in Victoria, and there's a statue of Terry Fox where he was supposed to end his race. And I think what always struck me about that, and I think about it often still, is that everyone can pick up and run that race. It wasn't really just his race. It was always ours, and Canadians in particular seem to have a spirit of Terry in us. He's maybe arguably our most famous Canadian of all time. So what you're doing definitely has that spirit of Terry in it, and it's quite beautiful and inspiring, and I'm sure you've inspired a lot of people on the way. But it would be sad if I didn't ask you what you will be doing in your one day in St. Andrews to end this interview.
Well, John Weaver, my brother, and his wife Beth Weaver, who's a New Brunswick native, run Salty Towers, and so I think they're going to be showing us around town. And so I think that's what they have. John did say, what kind of shape do you need to be in order to cycle to St. John tomorrow? How riotous can we have the evening, but we've got used to getting to bed pretty early to get going. But I think maybe we'll make an exception here. So we'll look to you for advice on that.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you for making the time to come sit with us on your short trip to
thank you.
St. Andrews. I appreciate it
Thank you
much.
so much for having us.
And you ask good questions.
Good. I hope so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My guests today have been Ross Weaver and Bernie Potvin of Old Men in Action. I'm Vicki Hogarth. Thank you for watching Southwest Magazine.
Southwest Magazine is a news and public affairs production of CHCO Television.